Hey, this is former Blue Devil lineman Matt Skura. You're listening to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. Go Duke, go ACC.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC football podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, it's good to be back together. We got one more preview that we're going to do here, the only one we're going to do together this whole offseason. You want to tell us who we got?
It's like riding a goddamn bike. Kelly Quinlan, JacketsOnline.com. Here to preview Georgia Tech. We can call him friend of the program because he's been on here a million times. Kelly, what's up, man?
What's up, guys?
I was going to say, it's been, what is this, like 5 years now you've done this with us or something? You've been a recurring guest for a while.
Yeah, it's been a pretty regular occurrence. I had someone, it's funny you guys were doing this because like I had someone send me like a private message asking me if I was doing your podcast the other day.
Hell yeah.
So I thought you have some fans out there. And so I thought that was very funny because I was like, yeah, it may have been yesterday someone asked me. Maybe it was just on my message board. And like I was like, yeah, I'm doing it tomorrow, and I did a Florida State one earlier today, and it's the time of year for that stuff.
It is that time. Kelly, as we talk to you here, it's the evening of August 15th. We always like to note that being how on-demand audio works in the world. But we are here, what are we, like 9 days away from Georgia Tech meeting Florida State in Dublin. That's going to kick off the season week 0. That's the start of what will be a bit of a treacherous schedule for Georgia Tech, we'll say, this year. We'll get into that in a little bit. I do want to just start off, I mean, looking back at last year, Brent Key gets the team 6-6 in the regular season. They win the Gasparilla Bowl. I think by all means, that was something that fans by and large saw as a success. I mean, that was the first bowl game in 5 years. And I think showed some pretty quick progress in building coming off of what was a pretty calamitous Jeff Collins era.
Yeah, I mean, I think, looking back on it now, obviously people are still upset about the Bowling Green and the Boston College games because if you win those, then you have a chance at 9-win season, and you're not playing in the Gasparilla Bowl. Mm-hmm. But you got to avenge probably one of Jeff's worst road losses at Central Florida by beating them in the bowl game, the game that ultimately got him fired. That was, a real catalyst for a lot of things that happened around that time. With the AD getting fired and then Jeff getting fired literally that weekend. And then, they had moments like they played Georgia probably as close as anyone did in the regular season, other than maybe one other game. And, they were beating Louisville in that game, kind of gave up the rope there. Played Ole Miss close for 3.5 quarters or something like that of that game. It was like a touchdown game at one point in the fourth quarter. Then you had like some weird, miraculous things like the Miami game and stuff. And I think that made it actually in some ways more enjoyable and tolerable that they lost like a game against Bowling Green or whatever, because you had that high moment of just the sheer stupidity of Mario Cristobal's coaching and losing yet a third game in his career to not taking a knee at the end of the game. Trying to get a dude 100 yards rushing. So
feels good.
I was there for the block kick, the Austin Twins thing. Like Pat Gamble blocked that field goal against Florida State, which was pretty improbable. This was much more improbable. Like it was statistically almost impossible for them to lose that game, and yet they did.
Pretty damn funny.
Miami. Yeah, I mean, and it was funny to not be like covering the team that was on the losing end of one of, like when the football bounced off a dude's helmet in Miami and Georgia Tech lost a game down there. So it was funny to see them kind of get some revenge for some of the weird stuff that they lost. Another game where like maybe that was the same game where it like stormed in the middle of the game. They were beating the tar out of them. So yeah, I mean it was a productive season. They were competitive. It took them a while to figure out the offense. The defense was a mess all year. They overhaul the defense. You fire Andrew Thacker, who helped Brent Key keep his job and was able to keep his job as defensive coordinator. I think probably the right thing to do in the situation if you're Brent, hoping to recapture some magic there. But they changed the staff and all of that just didn't gel. And so he cleaned house on the defensive side of the ball. And now they have Tyler Santucci. They should be better it's hard to be worse. They're 112th or whatever they were last year. So, as I said to people, if you get into, top 80, 90, you're going bowling, and top 75, you could win 8, 9 games in the ACC with the way it is with the offense, if it is on par with what it was a year ago. I think the big thing was the offense being so good. I think no one expected that. And it took them a while. Like, once they figured out they were going to run downhill, they were going to run with Haynes King. Haynes, I think, got a little healthier than maybe he started the season at, and was able to run better in the second half of the year. And all those things coalesced, and they became very good. And that's sort of the secret sauce they found. And it'll be interesting to see what they do this year, because obviously Buster, coming from UGA, has an understanding of run the damn football. And that's been their strength. So do they play their strengths, but they improve their weapons on the offensive side? The big thing that no one talked about, and I brought this up earlier today, I was talking to Florida State guys, Georgia Tech lost their 2 top receivers they were expecting to have to go into last season by the middle of the second game against South Carolina State when Chase Lane got hurt. They lost Leo Blackburn, tore his ACL in camp. He was expected to start. And then Chase Lane was starting over Eric Singleton, basically. And then he gets hurt. I think he hurt his hamstring or something like that in the South Carolina State game, and was never the same the rest of the year, trying to play hurt. He's back. So you have those 2 guys back. You have Singleton back. You have Malik Rutherford back. You added Jackson Hawes as a really dynamic tight end. I think they have some nice pieces. You wonder a little bit about the running back depth. I would say that on paper is probably the biggest question mark. They got talent, just not a ton of experience there. But overall, the offense, they returned 4 or 5 starters. They took an all Conference USA. Is that where MTSU is?
Yes. Or Sunbelt? Sunbelt.
Yeah,
maybe.
or one of them. Yeah. Anyways, Middle Tennessee State's all conference guard is there now. They're starting right guard, and they played last year with a guy from Princeton. So, I think this should be a pretty good team on paper. The question is just, is the defense good or not?
On the offensive side, I mean, it really starts with Haynes King. I mean, I think everybody, looking at Georgia Tech and looking at how successful they were offensively last year, with Buster Faulkner calling the plays and the way Haynes King looked, especially the second half of the year with how healthy he looked in the running game especially, I think the questions with King are, okay, number one, does he stay healthy if he's running the ball like that over a full season, right? Because he's got the injury history. But number two, the turnovers. Now, he's a junior. He's gotten better every year. He's gotten better even within a season, as we saw last year. Are the biggest concerns with him just flat out don't turn the ball over, right? Or is it going to be something else that fans, outside of Georgia Tech should be watching for heading into 2024?
So it's interesting. Someone had me look up a really obscure stat on Pro Football Focus. They have all these different statistics, and this one was percentages of passes thrown that were intercepted, like bad passes that were picked off. And he had like the most completed interceptions, like the most picks on these attempts. Like his percentage was like way off from what like everyone else was in the country. Right. Like he had bad luck essentially.
Plays?
Turnover worthy plays. Yep.
Yeah.
And he had the worst percentage of actually the defense converting them against him. So there was some bad luck involved. There was another guy, it might have been Cam Ward or somebody, that had like 40 of them or something. Like they had more than Haynes King, but like only 7 picks or something. Like, so there is some luck involved in that. He made some terrible decisions at times. People forget it was his first year really being a starting quarterback in college.
Yeah. Yep.
He had played, a game and a half 2 years before that, got hurt, and then played, off and on in a really funky quarterback situation at A&M the next year where he was constantly getting pulled and stuff. So last year was his first time going. Now, this is where it gets interesting for me as someone that's covered Georgia Tech for so long. And even going back to my time before Tech when I covered Georgia, I'm having a hard time in my mind remembering a guy starting every game 2 years in a row for me covering a team. Because it didn't happen with Paul. I'm like almost 100% certain of that. Several of them came against Mike's team, actually, where the backup were the one game that the backup started. Matthew Jordan and
I was in
Tobias
attendance
Oliver
for that.
And Tobias Oliver, yeah.
I was in attendance for the Matthew Jordan game in Blacksburg. I was texting Joey before because Georgia Tech's center was hurt too. I forget his name right now.
Yeah,
Their
they had,
center was
they
hurt
had the
too.
entire middle. Well, they had their B back out too. Like in one of those games, that might have been that game.
Unreal.
The entire middle of the offense for Paul's triple option was out.
I hammered the Hokies at the window, and that did not work out for me.
I did as well, and it didn't work out for me either.
Yeah.
Well, it worked out for you that they won. So like, that
just
part of
emotional hedge. Yeah,
just cost some money, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like that's it happens, but it's more improbable than many of us think about. It started to be a little more common nowadays, but like Reggie Ball maybe did it. That might be the last time at Tech,
That's a
probably.
name. Yeah.
I mean, so that's 20 plus years ago, like
Yeah.
at this point. So yeah, I mean, that's where it gets interesting. Can Haynes King stay upright and healthy for an entire season, play an entire season? It benefits him the way the schedule unfolds because they're playing week 0. You get the triple bye week now.
Right.
So that does help. Maybe that's the thing that gets him over that hump too. Like having that extra time. They have, a veteran offensive linebacker that should be one of the better ones in the league. All of those things combined, but he is not afraid to run the football, and you can't take that away from his game because it makes him dynamic. So it's a double-edged sword there, but they have Zach Byron as a pretty solid number 2 quarterback, could start at a lot of places in college football, and I think that maybe that gives them the confidence to not worry about it, and that maybe is a way you avoid injuries. I mean, I was joking with Zach one time that like it's funny he played behind like the only guy who didn't miss like snaps or whatever last season in the ACC. Like it was just dumb luck that way it worked out, but it worked out really well for Georgia Tech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about, Kelly. That's Zach Byron, a guy that I know there's been some speculation about with other Georgia Tech fans, and we're in the day and age of college football where if you're a quarterback and you're not getting regular snaps, you're probably going to try to transfer somewhere. And there was concern that he might do that, but he has stuck around and seems like a guy that there's some solid confidence in as a backup quarterback. And I mean, he came in and did kind of the Tebow thing a couple of times last year, running quarterback power and things at the goal line, like that kind of thing. Have you heard any sort of chatter, any sort of consideration? Like, do you think this coaching staff would do the thing maybe that like Paul Johnson did? I think it was in 2012 that like Tevin Washington and Vad Lee, would both get a couple drives. Like, do you see him getting sort of game reps this year if Haynes King's healthy?
I don't know. I mean, they had that package in for Zach the whole season, and they just didn't use it a lot. It was something they had worked on from the very beginning of the year. They're not at the point like tomorrow's practice on Friday would be when they'd start probably repping some of that stuff. So I don't know. I would think that they'll have something ready just in case. Also, just if Duke gets hobbled or whatever, and you need to have something. I think it makes sense to have a package of plays, but it'll be interesting to see how they choose to do that. Zach, decided he wanted to get his Georgia Tech degree, and he had overtures from P5 schools to go and try to go in and compete for an open starting job, and through back channels and stuff. And I'm not speaking out of school here. He's talked about it, and he felt like he had to get his degree. It was important to him and to finish up, and he really believed in what Buster and Chris Winkie and Brent Key especially is doing. And Brent's been very honest with him throughout this whole process, and they gave him every opportunity to win the job. Last year Haynes and him have competed every day, and he's improved dramatically. Haynes King's improved dramatically. Aaron Philo's really gotten better. So that quarterback room is pretty impressive. It's as deep as I've seen at Georgia Tech. But again, I covered a lot of the Paul Johnson era where it wasn't exactly murderer's row behind the starter much of that time. You maybe had 2 guys. The best year was probably sadly like Tevin, Vad, and JT. I think was like 1 year, and that wasn't great. So and maybe that I don't even know if maybe they did know. I don't remember, but
I don't remember. Yeah.
But so when you look at all that stuff, that's sort of the things that I look at. And I think that, could they do that? Yeah, absolutely. It just depends probably on like how they run the football too. If Jamal's able to get downhill, if say like Anthony Carey steps up or Evan Dickens or one of the young guys, and is that Dante Smith threat, then I feel like maybe you don't necessarily have to do that as much. That can be a little bit more of a hammer in there. And Carey's certainly capable of. There's a guy named Trelane Maddox that's tore his knee up last year in high school as a senior. He's almost back. He'll be back at some point this season. He's a freak. He's a big old dude at running back. So he looks like an NFL running back as a freshman. So does Carey. So like they got some dudes. Like it's just, do they want to do that with a game? And then the other thing too is they could get the slots more involved in the jet sweep game and stuff like that. They haven't done as much of that. And that's part of Buster's playbook that just has the pop passes, all those things haven't been quite as big a function in the offense yet. And it'll be interesting to see if that maybe picks up as well.
I guess my question, I mean, obviously Jamal Haynes is back. It's gigantic. And you started to kind of answer this question, but behind him, is it really just going to be Trey Cooley or bust, or do you think these freshmen are going to seriously push for playing time here?
I mean, I like Trey Cooley. He's a nice kid, it seems like. I don't know him well. Anthony Carey is one of the most talented high school running backs I've seen in a while. And I think that he's going to have a real chance to play immediately. I think Maddox, when he's healthy, is going to be really dynamic. And I think Evan Dickens is a very solid dude. Is he going to be Dante Smith? Probably not. But, like, he can definitely make some plays. So I think they got options. I would not be shocked to see Carey end up being the guy in the second half of the season, maybe. I wonder where he is in his – I think the things holding him back are things like pass pro and maybe his
Fair.
– I don't know where his knowledge of the offense is. But those would be maybe the areas where Trey Cooley would have a little bit of an edge. But I think as the season goes on, you'll see more of those younger guys play. And I think that that makes more sense. Cooley just hasn't necessarily performed when the lights have been on yet. And I don't know how many more of those chances you give him when you're playing Florida State and Georgia State, and there's what's going to be Georgia State's Super Bowl in game 2, and then at Syracuse, after that. I just think you have to put your best foot forward, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's to me, it's going to be important, whatever the backup running back situation is, just because, I mean, Jamal Haynes is the big name, and he had a really good year last year, but, I mean, he's listed at 5'9", 190. Like, that's not, that's not Andre Williams, 6'4", 250, whatever, going to be able to take the punishment going between the tackles, for a full 12 weeks. So he's going to need some help for sure there. The offensive line, Kelly, and you mentioned, I mean, it's looking good. And to me, some of this is homegrown. Some of it is a transfer situation with a couple of different guys. But I guess I'm just curious to hear your take on just, I mean, I'm impressed in just the way that they have put this group together. They have developed some homegrown guys, and quickly this has gone from like a very like shaky, questionable group that, year in, year out, it's like they might have like 6 to 7 guys, where now it's almost like they're going too deep, feeling pretty good about the guys they've got to play, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, Ethan McKinney started a bunch of games for him last year, right, at left tackle. And then Corey Williams kind of like notoriously had maybe the worst start of a season of any left tackle in history in that Louisville game. He got whipped a couple times. And they put him down, and then they put in McKinney, and McKinney played like a big chunk of the season. I don't know how much you think McKinney's going to play this year. Like, he's behind a bunch of older guys, and they've moved him to guard, and he's playing guard and tackle. This is a guy that started multiple games and played pretty well as a true freshman a year ago, but their O-line depth is so deep right now that he may not play a lot. A guy that came out of nowhere in fall camp was Jordan Brown, who was this transfer they took from Charlotte as kind of a extra body. They were hoping athletic big guy, maybe could play guard or tackle. The light bulb came on for him, and he got healthy over the summer and was a different guy in fall camp and over the summer. And now he's pushing Corey Robinson. He's pushing different people for playing time. And so all of those things, that competition, Harrison Moore was like a throw-in. It seemed like getting Graham Knowles, the quarterback from Texas, people didn't think much about him. And he was just like this, low 3-star guy with a few offers. And he's turned out to be like their Swiss Army knife dude that can play anywhere on the line. As a true freshman, probably as the backup center maybe when they line up to play Florida State. So they've built all this depth. They have two really experienced offensive line coaches beyond Brent Key, obviously, who's the head coach. You have Jeep Wade, who's the offensive line coach, Buster Faulkner's right hand guy, the run game coordinator essentially too for the team, and then you have Alan Mogridge, who they brought in he was at ECU. Daughter's going to Georgia Tech. I think she plays volleyball, and he joined the staff, and with the new rules, he can actually coach. And they sort of knew that was coming down the pipe when they brought him in. And Coach Mo is a guy I've known for many years. He's coached at UCF, at USF, and a bunch of other places. And they're able to break the line into two different groups and really teach, and have those moments with those guys to develop. And I think it's been a big difference for a lot of the younger guys to get coached up in a way they wouldn't before the rules changed in the last year.
Jordan Vanderberg, they add, right? I mean, we're talking about defensive line now. They go into the portal, they get Thomas Gore, they get Romello Height. Obviously the defense was an issue all year last year, and Brent Key, being the type of coach that he is and understanding the need to get those types of guys in the trenches, goes and gets 3 power conference transfers. Guys who are coming from really, really good schools, right? This should be an improved unit, right? I mean, there's the whole continuity thing, but I feel like you worry less about continuity on the defensive side of the ball than you do on the offensive line, for example. I feel like this defensive line is just going to be much better than it was a year ago, just by looking at it. But how has it looked in fall camp?
I mean, they look night and day different.
Yeah.
I would say the big thing too is Santucci. So last year they played Zeke Biggers 60 plays in a game. Zeke Biggers was 335 pounds, and just they were killing him. He had nothing left in the fourth quarter of games,
Yeah.
and he talked about this. Santucci was like, "That's crazy. We're not doing that. We need depth." And Brent agreed, and they went out and got Vandenberg from Penn State, who was basically their third defensive tackle last year. They went and got Thomas Gore, was a guy who started at Georgia State and played a good little bit at Miami last year for them. Is sort of a prototype nose tackle. Not tall, he's my height, but just a fire hydrant of a human. And then Romello Height's a real freak in the whole thing, because he's just this dynamic pass rusher dude that I haven't really seen at Tech in a long time. In a different way than Keon White. Keon White was really dynamic, but Keon White was just this massive dude that was really physical. Romello's that classic edge rusher guy. And then the big thing I think a lot of people missed out on is last year, Sylvain Yandagen gets hurt 27 snaps into the Louisville game, blows out his knee. He was their second best defensive end the year before, and was playing almost as well as Keon White at the end of that season. And then had all these projections and was looks like an NFL guy, and gets hurt, has a second season-ending injury of his career. And Sylvain's back, looks good. So that's adding 4 guys right there. You brought Jason Moore back, who transferred to Temple and came back. They're 8 deep at defensive tackle. They're 8 bodies deep at D tackle. They're 3 across at the end positions right now, deep with guys you would be comfortable playing in a game, I think. And that's a far cry from anything they've had in a while in terms of D-line depth. Probably since, Paul Johnson's first year, when they had, Derek Morgan and Michael Johnson and Vance Walker and Darryl Richard. This is that level of talent. And you're seeing the biggest difference to me is the coaching up. 2 years ago, you saw it with David Turner when he was there with that staff, Jeff's last year. And then they kind of regressed last year under Marco Coleman. And now they have Jeff Simpson, who's literally considered one of the best defensive line coaches in the country, and was an NFL guy too. And those kids look just markedly different, and he's coaching the hell out of them. And that's been impressive for me to watch. It's just he literally coaches them every second they're on the field. And he talked about it, he's those are the moments that I have to teach, and so I'm going to make the most out of it. They're watching the 4s, not even the 3s out, at the end of a scrimmage or something. and he's like pointing to Horst Lockett and Zeke Biggers as two defensive tackles, like stuff that the walk-on guy is doing wrong in the game. That's the stuff to me that really gets me, because most people at that point you're just waiting for Brent Key to blow the whistle and then practice and kind of walking around, and this dude's like coaching the whole time, and that's crazy to me. And I think that's going to pay some dividends. Those guys have NFL bodies. They have some twitch. Like Jordan Vanderberg's a freak. He's freaky strong. Romello Height is a freaky defensive end. They have Kevin Harris back, who's a guy that hasn't been able to get home and get a lot of sacks, but he's a freaky NFL body. Can they find something there out of those guys? And I think there's enough dudes that they're going to find a combination that works, and they're going to be very multiple up front with what they do too. So I think that'll help.
Something I wanted to ask about was, I mean, this defense from last year loses a handful of guys that played a ton of snaps. I mean, I look at Jalen King, Paul Moala, KJ Wallace, Daquan Dowse, some of these guys. But for the most part, I mean, the core is largely coming back. And to me, thinking back on it, I mean, it's like I never really felt like this defense had problems because they were under-talented. It always felt like it was more of a coaching and teaching kind of issue. And we mentioned, I mean, Tyler Santucci comes in. He's the new defensive coordinator. They flushed basically, I think, the whole defensive staff. There might have been one holdover. I can't remember exactly.
Ricky Brumfeld stayed, but he was the special teams coordinator and just sort of helped in practice with the DBs a little bit. Now he's the corners coach. So technically he is a rollover, but that's all. Like, there's like 2 GAs and him and one analyst that stayed basically out of that whole. They torpedoed a room of like 12 people or something out of there.
Yeah, makes sense. And so that, I mean, I guess to some degree that answers my question, but I was curious to get your take. I mean, did you feel the same way that this defense had an appropriate amount of talent, or certainly has an appropriate amount of talent now, and just it was a coaching scheme, development, teaching, like off the field kind of issue primarily?
I mean, a lot of times there's just bad run fits and guys stepping in the wrong places, and you don't know if that's calls or confidence or bad coaching. I'll say the story I've been telling this offseason has been about the first day of spring football. When out Trent Tatum's a guy that came back that was really talented, just has never been consistent for them at linebacker. Trent, on the first day of practice, like the first day they're out there doing anything, they're just in shorts running and helmets running around. He takes a bad step, like in the first thing they do in 11-on-11, and Santucci just stops the whole thing and runs over to him. And he's like, "Hey, this is what you're doing wrong. These are the wrong steps. This is and he's coaching him up." And I feel like those guys just weren't getting that. Like, it was that simple of stuff. Like, hey, do this, this, and this, and execute it, and be crisp about it. And the run fits looked a lot better to me for what I saw in the spring, and even, little bits we've gleaned in camp. I think that fixing that's like half your battle right there. I think being more dynamic up front, though, makes a huge difference because it takes so much pressure off those guys. If you can get a natural pass rush with a 4-man front, if you can bring 5 and get a sack or real pressure, it changes the whole dynamic in the back end, because that's why those guys played better 2 years before. They had a pass rush with Keon White. They had Sylvain that was giving them a pass rush. Those guys had, 25, 30 quarterback pressures probably that year, and a bunch of sacks. And it seemed like last year they were just trying to strip the football or pick the ball off. That seemed to be like what you would see, like a guy going for a tackle, and instead of being fundamentally sound about it, he would be ripping at the ball and trying to chop with his hands and all those things, and maybe not lose containing on the tackle, right? Mm-hmm. And now guys are being very fundamentally sound with the tackle. You still want to try to strip the ball, but you do that when you have help. You're not trying to do that just as I'm down the field, let me see if I can poke this ball out, And I think there was a lack of confidence in the calls and what they were doing. And I think there were issues with the secondary coaching, to be honest with you. I think that had been a mess for a long time.
I was going to say, that feels like that was a theme for a few years there. I guess in a lot of what you're describing, I mean, I get the sense that there was a lack of attention to detail for a number of years, and maybe even to some degree the last couple of years under Johnson. That I feel like that is really kind of a hallmark of what Brent Key is installing here. Is it seems like, and you mentioned Tyler Santucci stopping practice to point out, hey, Trinelli Sam, you took the wrong steps. Like little things like that, and making sure that whatever you do it well. It just seems like that is a difference in what we're seeing right now versus what we had been seeing for, at the very least, 3 years, if not more.
You mean like when I went to Jeff Collins' first practice in 2019 and they ran around like crackheads and they had 4 huddles going at the same time on 4 different parts of the field. And he said that we don't make corrections here. We do it in the film room. So we let them make the mistakes and then we show it to them in the film room. And I thought that was the craziest freaking thing I'd ever heard in my life from a football coach. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's a little different than that. I mean, and that's the thing, man. Like, Santucci's is sort of like a Brent Key of defense. Like when you watch him out there coaching, he is, yelling and being, demonstrative to guys when he needs to be. He has that kind of cool, icy demeanor at other times that Brent has. 10,000 yard stare. I think it's interesting to watch him. And he worked for Mike Elko, who I think is one of the best defensive minds of the last 20 years of college football.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who he learned from. And a guy who was successful with Elko coaching up bad talent, right? Like, or lesser talent, not bad talent, but coaching lesser guys and getting the most out of them, right? Like at Wake Forest or Bowling Green. And then as he got more talent, he became more successful as a coach, to the point where he got a head coaching job at Duke and made them pretty scary on the defensive side of the ball. Their offense is really what kind of was their bugaboo there. But I mean, you go cut on the tape from that first game from last year, Duke playing Clemson. We all watched it. It was an insane defensive performance. Like they just got after Klubnik and made his life miserable. And without, Mr. 5-star and stuff, they had some good defensive players, but they were not Georgia or Alabama or something on defense, or even Clemson themselves. So I think that, Santucci, I'm real curious to see what he does. It's been so long since the defense was anything but like, striving for average seems like, a high goal at Georgia Tech defensively. From really what we've seen, if you watch their, people like you and I are watching games for years and years. I think '08 was the last time they were probably good on defense, like good. And then you going through the Tenuta years, they were really good on defense. But like even during O'Leary, they weren't great on defense. So like it's been a while, and it's not been a consistent thing. And I think that's something that Brent definitely wants to fix. And they're trying to get guys, and they're doing a really good job recruiting and finding the right kind of guys. I think Brent's big thing too, which I like, is he's looking at not only talent and development ability and all those things, but also the character of the players and do they fit into what he's trying to do. Because now everyone's getting paid, NIL, there's a lot of drama and all that stuff. If you bring in the wrong types of characters, it can really torpedo your room. And we've seen that happen with some programs. Look at what's going on at Colorado right now. Like, you have to be smart about how you do this stuff. And I think Brent's plan will work. He needs some things to fall in his way to work. The scheduling gods have not been helpful for them. I was talking to Georgia Tech's SID, and he made a note to me after the poll came out. He goes, look at this. And he showed me the top half of the league and the bottom half of the league. Georgia Tech had one game against the bottom half of the league, and they played everyone in the top half of the league for the rest of their games. And it was like, how does that happen? But next year it's like reversed. So you got to try to survive this year. My honest answer is if they're in the top 70, top 60 in total defense by the end of the year, they should be in the mix for Charlotte, I think.
Yeah.
This
but year it can go
year? This year.
Well,
if things go sideways this year, then, getting back to a bowl game, I think, is a very reasonable goal too. But I think it just depends on the defense. I think that's the pendulum their whole season swings on. If the defense is good, then they have a chance every week to play well. If the defense is not good, then the offense is going to have to outscore people, and that's a trickier proposition. But I just tend to think, looking at everything and talking to everyone and seeing even just the swagger the team has, that they think the defense will be pretty good.
Yeah. I can tell that I'm a tortured Atlanta sports fan and a tortured, Georgia Tech sports fan, because like I'm constantly waiting on bad news or waiting on things to not work out the way I think they should, and I do wonder a little bit about the offense. Like are they just going to fall back into place the same way that they were, the back half of last year? Like, or is there going to be a little bit of a regression and, take a couple steps back and all of a sudden, you struggle in some of those shootout games, maybe a little differently than you did last year?
Yeah,
But
I think that's a legitimate concern, man. Like, I think that when I look at Georgia Tech, do you just roll the ball back out and you're the same offense you were a year ago? I think that's very rare to see. There's always sort of this curve where you're trying to find yourself because you do have different pieces. Like the tight ends are different. The running back situation is a little bit different. The receivers are technically somewhat different, at least on the one side, because you played most of last year with like Avery Boyd and Abdul Janae, taking a lot of those reps, and those guys are maybe further back in the pack at the moment. And you're playing the Chase Lanes and Leo Blackburns with Eric Singleton and Malik and Christian Leary. And so how does that look? Buster, what is he putting in that's different? How's he tweaking things? And then my big thing too with Haynes King is seeing the progressions of him reading the field, right? Like there were so many times he would force balls and like the tight end would be running a seam route wide open and he threw into double coverage to Eric Singleton in the end zone. I forget what game it was. It was the one where he got forced out of. He caught the ball, but he was like just out of bounds in the end zone. It was a great play, but the tight end was like wide open on the play for a touchdown. Like if you just throw to him, and it's those little things. But he got locked on and saw what he was looking for on the first move, and just gunned it. And that's the stuff that makes difference. Can Eric Singleton use his body better? He was bad about getting kind of pushed out of bounds and putting himself in these positions where he would have to make crazy catches because he couldn't use his body to leverage the DB to get what he wanted in terms of spacing against the sideline. All of those different little things, right? Like if he can make that leap, that's a huge leap for him because he's a really talented dude. To staying healthy again there. They were not healthy last year receiver. It really hurt them. Throughout the season. So I think those things are the things that you got to figure out. And it took them, I think, everyone's kind of agreed. I think it was the North Carolina game where they felt like they found their identity offensively. And that was a good bit into the season. The way the schedule sets up right now, it doesn't bode well if that's what you're doing, if you're trying to find yourself. But I mean, last year they looked great in the beginning of the Louisville game. That whole first half, they looked great. So I think there's reasons to be optimistic there too.
Well, and to your point, I agree that I think the whole thing primarily hinges on the defense, but the way that I look at it and think about it is you had a fringe top 100 defense last year. I mean, they were in the 90s or in the hundreds, like, and obviously that's not good enough, but on some level it's really not that hard to improve off of that. Like to just improve to average, that would be a massive jump, but it's really not like an impossible task at all, I think. And so that's where I'm optimistic here, thinking that's a reasonable jump to make, is to have a, as you've mentioned, a top 60-ish defense. I think that's a reasonable thing.
Just try to be average, right? There's 132 teams or whatever. So whatever, 70, 68, whatever it is, like being dead average would be a huge improvement over what, with the offense playing the way it was. Because really 2 years ago they won because the defense was really good, right? And they created turnovers and won some games for them. They made enough plays offensively to win, but they were not good on offense. That's really the only season where that's been the case for them. And since, God knows when, 2008 probably. Like, so, yeah, just getting into the middle defensively. And it'll be hard, right? They play some, Florida State. I'm sure they're going to be decent with DJ Hughes, a very solid quarterback. He is not Jordan Travis. He's not going to make these Lamar Jackson-like plays, but he also doesn't turn the ball over. So, like, he plays within the scheme of the offense. He'll throw the ball away and eat it. They have a lot of weapons. They can run the football. So that's a tough offense. Syracuse, I would imagine they'll be a lot better offensively with an actual quarterback this time when Georgia Tech plays them, unlike what they had last year when they trotted out the tight end and the running back at quarterback. So, yeah, when you look at those things, Louisville, that Jeff Brom's a great offensive mind. Like, I'm sure they'll be decent. it's just a question of like how do you fit your pieces together. I like the fact though that Tech's offense has so many pieces back, and that's so much of like a lot of the stuff too is the adjustment. It took them a while to just adjust to how to call plays for Haynes King, right? And now they have a whole year of data points on that and 2 years worth of practice of seeing what he's comfortable with, what throws he likes, what is in his wheelhouse, what looks give him a hard time, all of those things, and how to scheme against that. I think the helmet comm thing may help them as well because Buster's able to maybe adjust a little more on the fly. Buster Faulkner, offensive coordinator, can maybe see the pre-snap look, give him a little bit of a tweak here and there instead of having to maybe try to signal everything in at the last second, having guys on the same page.
Yep.
We'll see though. I'm very curious about the helmet comm thing and then the flow of the game with the clock changes too, like not having the timeouts after first downs and all that stuff. What does it look like? I feel like you're going to lose 10, 15 plays a game across the board from just the time changes.
They're doing the sideline tablets this year too, right? Like that's another
so
technology thing.
So things I've been seeing in high school since I was covering high school high school football before I started covering Georgia Tech. In 2007, I go to places where they have like literally a drone flying over the state, like Zach Pyron. I remember watching him play at Alabama at his high school. They had a drone flying over, shooting the game for both teams. Each team had a drone. They had giant TVs on the sidelines, and they had every play literally the second the dudes walked off the field that they could go back through like the previous series and go through frame by frame. Yeah. You couldn't have anything. You couldn't even have a damn picture. Like they were drawn on a dry erase board. Like that was a huge technological advance from chalk. The difference between having a chalkboard and a dry erase board was their big innovation in college football. And the thought was that it was because as a money cost for these lower tier programs to not the G5 schools couldn't afford to. I was like, man, I go to broke high school where like they barely have uniforms and they're flying a drone. Like that's a bunch of BS, man. Like they'll figure it out. Like let them have some technology. It's stupid. And you know what? It doesn't prepare them well for the NFL anyways, because if they're getting that stuff in the pros, they have the Surface tablets and all that stuff. Like, I feel like you need to see that and be used to at least having some visual representation in real time of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, it was funny to me. They couldn't even have like the pictures, like back in if you go watch like 80s NFL, they have like, literally like some dude in a like photo darkroom down the hall, like taking pictures of all 22 or something and like getting them developed or something. And now, we've graduated from that in college football to at least having some semblance of technology with iPads. So I'll be curious. The players seem to like it. The headcom things are pretty funny because the players have some funny stories at different schools about what the coaches do with them. If you watch like Tyler Santucci and Buster Faulkner have these like little walkie-talkie looking things clipped on their like gym shorts they wear at practice, and they can like shout stuff at them like whenever they want. So they've like the first couple of days they were kind of messing with it quite a bit and shaking them up while they were out doing stuff, just kind of yell at them in the headset. And apparently, like the players can adjust the volume in them, and like there's all sorts of different stuff that you can do. And different players want different amounts of information. Some just want the base call. Some want, hey, give me like some context here. What am I looking for? So it all can be based on that too. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. I feel like it's going to make for some very interesting broken plays too. As people adjust and maybe screw up the call or not half the defense doesn't get it or something, you end up with like a jailbreak on one side of the field.
Paul Johnson's just glad he got out of here before had to deal with headcom stuff. He would have caught that much more grief sending guys into the huddle.
I'm still upset. I wanted him to coach a game. This was before Jeff Collins got hired, and we knew about his fascination with Waffle House. I wanted him to just clip one of those Waffle House menus to his waist.
Like a literal Waffle House menu.
Yeah, literally take a Waffle House menu, clip that. And I told him this. And he was like, no. He had like a sticky note, like one of these things. And he would have like a couple things written on it, and it'd be like half crumpled up, and that was his sheet for the game. And at halftime, he would maybe write a few things down on it.
Legend.
That's just so different than like these dudes. Like, there's people who call like with an iPad and stuff, like, where they have like there's all sorts of technology now guys can call games with. So I think it's very funny to see to think about Paul Johnson in this era with like the helmet comms. And he's still grabbing a guy by the face mask and yelling the play into his ear hole and then sending him out in the field. That would be very funny to watch now. Like, come here, Christian Leary, and shoot him into the field.
He'd catch that much more grief for it.
And then hearing him like MF a kid like on the like on the sideline, and they're doing. Also, the other thing I'd love to see now, dude, Joey, is like I want to see like that Paul Johnson interview, like mid game, like the mid quarter interview they do, because he was pissed doing the halftime interview. Even when they were winning, because they would do that in like when you're running off. Even if he was winning, he was pissed off doing it. I can't imagine how he would feel at the end of each quarter having to do one, no matter what. Like how pissed he would be. Like
in the middle of a drive. Like,
it pisses me off for the coaches. I was like, man, that is like the last thing I would want to do if I was coaching a football game, is like have like the sideline person like come over and ask me a stupid question like while I'm in the middle of a game. Like, it's like when they have the earpiece in on the baseball players on ESPN and like they make an error or something because they're like chatting away with them, and then the ball is like, oh no, and like going. Like that's just I think there's a little too much access now to be cool, and that's the bridge that's too far. But yeah, seeing Paul now, I mean, I can't imagine like I would have like just even seeing him like make a TikTok or something would be incredible. Can you imagine like
doing the Brian Kelly 360 picture thing with recruits? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, he's like holding doing a spin around the old Edge building.
Oh, I can't imagine.
And Brent's just young enough. Brent's like a hair older than I am. He is just like young enough to be okay with a lot of this stuff, but he's like on the fringe of being too grumpy for it. And like I can't imagine like some of the like stuff these guys have to deal with now. It's unbelievable. If you ever want a good laugh, there's a kid that committed to Tulsa, and he has like the greatest commitment video I've ever seen. You should look it up. It's viral. He has like a stack of money on a bed, and just none of it makes any sense. It's like some like dude, like rando dude that committed there, but it's like some video that's gonna haunt this kid for the rest of his life. Probably. It's like so bad.
The internet never forgets.
No, and that's the era we live in now, right? Like, mercifully, they did not have camera phones or any of those things when I was 18 to 22 years old. Well, I'll say I'm happy for that. It was a
simpler time and place, that's for sure.
But yeah, man, I think it's just it's going to be interesting to see what Georgia Tech's like, to get it back on topic here. I just don't know, man. I have them anywhere from like 7-9 wins. I think 6 would be sort of like a meh season, but it'd be all right. With the schedule. If it turns out the schedule's harder than I still feel like there's some sort of fake teams in this thing, whether it's Louisville or NC State or somebody's going to end up being kind of phony. I'm not buying the North Carolina hype. Not buying Mike's not in here, but the Virginia Tech hype seems a little crazy to me given who they beat last year, which was nobody. Did they beat a team with a winning record last year?
Mike has been pretty adamant on social media that the biggest thing that he needs to see to declare Virginia Tech being back is for them to beat one good team. Because I don't think that they've gotten that done yet. I mean, they beat Tulane in the bowl game, but that was like the shell of Tulane.
Well, that was like after they knew the guy was leaving and all that.
Yeah, Willie Fritz had left, and the whole thing.
When I do want to hit that team with the lame duck coach. Like, that's always brutal.
Yeah, and they had like 12 guys sitting out, and the whole. I mean, it was Orange Bowl light, to jab Florida State a little bit here. Speaking of Florida State, I do want to hit the schedule here. I mean, obviously, week 1, Dublin, Florida State, getting the whole game day treatment and the whole thing. I'm a little bit torn on that game between I mean, on the downside, you're playing like a projected top 10 team, reigning ACC champions, should have been in the playoff, like all that. Like, that's a really good roster. On the other hand, you're getting a team that has a ton of turnover. You're on foreign soil. There's, whatever potential home field advantage they could have had is probably not going to be there. I kind of think if you ever want to play Florida State this year, this is the spot that you want to get them. I see spreads of close to 2 touchdowns. I think that's way too much. And honestly, I give Georgia Tech a decent shot of winning that game on the field. Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They've got t-shirts, they've got sweatshirts, they've got hoodies, they've got a short sleeve coach hoodie if you want to look like Coach Key. They've got onesies for babies. They've got all things for any man, woman, children, something for the whole family, all the Georgia Tech fans in your life. They need something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. You can go get t-shirts supporting NIL efforts with guys like Haynes King and Zach Pyron. They've got shirts supporting the basketball team, the baseball team, the volleyball team, all sorts of wonderful Tech traditions, all sorts of things. Again, any Georgia Tech fan in your life, they need something from Section103.com. Once again, use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. I particularly love the Feliz Bobby Dodd sweatshirts. We got Christmas season coming up before you know it. You're going to want one of those for your holiday party. Go get it all at Section103.com. Huge shout out to Steven and the gang. Thank you so much to them for their support of the Basketball Conference podcast. We would love it if you guys would go show your support for Section103.com as well. Now, back to the episode.
Oh, I was talking with the, Florida State podcast where those guys are kind of Florida State homers and, unabashedly about it. And they were like, they thought it was a crazy line too. I was like, man, I would bet a lot of money on 13.5 if I was a sports gambler. Like, that's a crazy number to me. And the line's moved down, I think, since then a little bit. I bet it will move down again closer to the game. That's just a crazy number. Those games have all been very close, except for the ones with Navy and Ireland. They've all been fourth quarter games pretty much. A lot have come from behind victories in those games over the years. Brent lost the one time Brent's been there. They lost in a come from behind game. I forget, Penn State maybe or somebody like that. When he was at UCF. Yeah, so like, do I think Florida State on paper would be a favorite team? Absolutely, right. The other thing I point out too is like, go back and watch like the last couple of years Florida State's first game or Georgia Tech's first game. Georgia Tech playing Louisville last year, blowing them out in the first half, or the LSU Florida State game was a weird game. Like these first games are always very, very difficult to handicap. And everyone's basically the first 3 weeks of the season, everyone's getting their footing. That's why so many teams try to schedule that FCS playing, Sunbelt school or something, and then gradually working your way up to like playing an American school or a Mountain West school or something. And then they get into their conference because you're trying to ramp yourself up to get ready for something, so you have an idea of what your team is. No one knows, right? Like, you don't know. Paul Johnson would talk about this. Like, he didn't know what he had necessarily until he saw his team on the field. You have a feeling. The more you do it, you probably have a better understanding of it. But again, like, even when you return so much, you can look different early in games. And sometimes people just go out and get like curb stomped in these season openers too. So you never know, man. I think it is the best time to play them, other than it was Spurrier's old line play. If you play Georgia in the first 2 weeks or something, guaranteed somebody's suspended. Other than one of like back in those days, like, yeah, you want to play somebody the first couple weeks of the season, because that's when you're the worst time to play a team is in November, because either they're folded or they're all in, right? And so playing this game now is better for Georgia Tech. Obviously, they beat them in 2020 down there with the freshman Jeff Sims and what was supposed to be a decent Florida State team. Went down there and beat them in that COVID game down there. So you never know. And in games, and the series has been pretty close, really. I mean, other than the game last year, or no, 2 years ago, sorry, Brent's interim year, when they went down, and that was like the moment Florida State figured it out. And happened to be against Georgia Tech, and they just kind of curb stomped them early. The games have been very back and forth and very close. Even the ACC championship games they played, and Tech had won 3 in a row in the regular season prior to the game in 22. So I expect a close game. I think Mike Norvell or Brent Key would tell you they expect a close game. I think if you get anything other than that, there's extenuating circumstances as to why, Haynes King plays like he did against Clemson, or DJU doesn't play well or gets hurt, or their offense struggles and Georgia Tech doesn't. Then that's the things that can turn the game. But the one thing I also say, man, is like the weather. I mean, it's going to be like 50 degrees at kickoff probably. It might rain. It's like 50-50 there, whether it rains. It is very different than what any of these teams have been practicing in this whole off season. And so that sucks the wind out of you. The jet lag sucks the wind out of you a little bit. The atmosphere being so different, food's different, everything's so different. It just feels unlike anything else that I've covered. Whether that's even like one of those basketball tournaments or something like that. Basketball is sort of a fluid sport in a controlled environment, right? Like this is not a controlled environment. You're playing in an Irish soccer stadium, football there, in front of a crowd that's not going to be as hostile as it would be if you were playing in Atlanta or Tallahassee.
Mm-hmm.
So how do these people figure that out? Do you bring your own energy? Do you all of those things, man, to me, like, are what is going to make or break this thing. And I imagine everybody's trying to go in with this is business. This is our business, and this is what we're doing, and that's our approach. It's a business game, but it's who executes that well. I think that'll be the big difference, and then who makes the fewest mistakes, man. Because like
Yep.
the games that Georgia Tech lost were mainly defensive errors and turnovers by quarterback. And when they didn't have those things, they were competitive with everybody they played.
Yep. I was gonna say, I remember being there 8 years ago, and you talk about a weird environment. I mean, there's a good number of Georgia Tech fans and a good number of Boston College fans, and then you also see some people running around there in like Chargers jerseys and like Lions jerseys and like
People
Buccaneers
flying all
jerseys
over from Europe that are just football fans that want to watch football.
Yeah, and so that's another like weird element of people that aren't really partial one way or the other, and only kind of understand the game maybe. So that's a whole other ball of wax. I look at this schedule, and I mean, I really feel like your best shot at stacking wins really has to be those first 7 games. And I really hate coming back across the pond and getting Georgia State and you mentioned their Super Bowl game. And then you go to Syracuse, which is like kind of been a little bit of a house of horrors for Georgia Tech since they've joined the ACC. VMI should be fine. At Louisville, that probably a little bit more competitive than I think a lot of people would give credit for at this point, between Georgia Tech and Louisville. Duke, off of bye week should be okay. And then at North Carolina, I mean, again, there's a lot of jokes been made already about their new defensive coordinator and whether Brent Key would want to stick an extra one in the end zone if he gets a chance at the end of that game. But I just, to me, that looks like the most forgiving stretch here. And yet a lot of these still feel, again, like I'll use the word like treacherous. Like you better play well in most of these games. Otherwise, any one of them you could lose.
Yeah, I mean, the most Georgia Tech thing, Joey, you and I both know, is they beat Florida State, they beat Louisville, and then somehow, like, Jeff Collins shuts them out in a game.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the Georgia Tech way, right, of the past however many years you want to go. Go back to
fan
at least,
existence.
At least, I would say at least Chan, right? Like,
yeah.
You
mentioned them winning the Florida State game in the COVID years. Like they also lost to Syracuse in the only game that Syracuse won that year. It's like,
and like Jeff Sims turned the ball over like 18 times in that game. Yep.
Yeah, ridiculous.
And that was the other game. I think Sylvain got hurt, had his other season-ending injury, and was that game. Yeah, I mean that's the only time they played Syracuse at Syracuse since they've been in the league. They've beat them every other time they've played them recently since they've been in the ACC. But yeah, that was the other time.
Yeah. All those
I've never. That's the only ACC stadium I haven't been to other than the 3 new schools, Syracuse, because we couldn't go because it was locked down. Like you couldn't go into New York, from here at the time. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, I fully expect the unexpected covering this team. I mean, look at the Bowling Green and the Boston College games last year, right? Boston College was not good, and that dude just ran all over them. And then Bowling Green literally just ran straight down the middle, and Haynes King turned the ball over too much, and just should stop scheduling MAC teams, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
You stay out of the MAC, go play Sun Belt or Conference USA or something.
And I think that to me is maybe the biggest thing I want to see this year, or one of the biggest things is, can you avoid like the ridiculous clunker game? You know, can you beat Georgia State? Can you beat VMI? Can you beat Duke? Like, not lose the really.
Yeah, I think that's, the right way to look at it. I mean, that's where you have to create, as Brent Key talks about, creating margin, right? Like doing things the right way, and you create margin for yourself. They've had no margin since 2009, quite frankly, because even in 2014 when Georgia Tech was good, they lost the Duke and the Carolina games that they both should have won that season, and set themselves behind where they had to play their tails off to get to the ACC championship game. So those are the things to me that like will be where you see the program start to grow. Does it happen this year? I don't know, because it's year 2. They have a good chance. I like what the roster they put together, but when you look at it in a broader picture, the schedule's very hard. It's a top 10 schedule right now on paper.
Mm-hmm.
You need some things to fall in your way. Miami reverting to being what they've been every year for the last, since they joined the ACC would help. Carolina not finding their defense would help. And Max Johnson not being very good. Things like playing Virginia Tech and Blacksburg, like all of those things that are sort of the bugaboos of the ACC. Georgia Tech's had some success with each of them, but trying to put that all together in one magical season is going to be interesting. Like I couldn't, when was the last time they beat Miami and Virginia Tech in a season? Like,
yeah.
So those are the things that I look at when I look at this. Florida State is an interesting measuring stick, but it's not the end of the season. It's not the thing that's going to crown them, because if it crowns them, they're going to be in big trouble against Georgia State. Because those kids are going to be fired up out of their minds to play that game. It'll be their first game, I think, under Del McGee. I don't think they play week 0. So I'm sure they'll be like, cracked out of their heads to play a big Georgia Tech team and try to get something for their coach.
Yep. You mentioned the measuring stick. I'm looking at the measuring stick game on this schedule as the Virginia Tech game, because I really feel like these programs are in very similar spots developmentally. They've both got probably 2 of the 5 best quarterbacks in the ACC. Kind of on the upswing. They both got coaches named Brent. And so I think that one, especially going to Blacksburg, I think, as you mentioned, I mean, I feel better about that if that's in Atlanta, but schedule is what it is. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what the spread is there, how that shakes out. Record wise, Kelly, I heard you earlier float out 7 wins. I heard you float out 9. Do you have an official record prediction, or I think typically you more settle for a range somewhere?
Sure. I'll give you my, let's see if I can dig it out. I feel like I went 8 wins in my preseason thing.
Wow.
I picked every ACC game, like across the whole league. I'll try to find it real quick while I'm talking. But my thought was sort of, I went through the league, and I think I picked Georgia Tech to finish 7th in the league. I think this is a year where there'll actually be like several ACC teams with like good win-loss records in the 9+ wins. I think like a SMU that has like a really soft schedule, or like there's a bunch of these teams that are sort of in this easier position in terms of being able to win some games for once, like and maybe actually have. And now the most ACC thing would be like, we'll watch and they'll all be like mediocre as crap, and everyone will say the league sucks. Whereas if it was the SEC, that's just the league's so deep that's what they're doing. Georgia Tech, 8-4. That's what I picked them.
Wow.
So here we go. I'll give you game by game too. I did it game by game.
Sure.
I had Georgia Tech start 4-0. I had them beating Florida State and Ireland. Then I had them losing at Louisville, beat Duke, beat Carolina, lose to Notre Dame in the Benz, beat Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, lose to Miami, beat NC State on Thursday night, lose at Georgia.
So that was Georgia, Miami, Notre Dame, and who was the other loss? Louisville?
Louisville.
Okay, yeah. Makes sense. 8-4.
That's my sort of best case scenario, I guess, would be the way to.
Yeah.
Like, there's a better best. That's my rational best case scenario looking at the team. If they beat Florida State, if they don't, then 7-5, and that's sort of where I've been landing is 7-9. Like the swing games to me are Florida State, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Miami, and NC State. Those are the ones that can swing their season.
The NC State game is the one that's also interesting to me. Looking at that at the end of the year, is a team that is ranked in the preseason, thought to be one of the 5 or 6 best teams in the ACC, but not completely.
When has Dave
totally
Doran done that, man? Like, they just are this like team every year that people are like excited about, and they just play like crap against some teams like early in the season and look terrible. And so it's like this consistent thing with him. Like he's like, he'll have this team, you're on paper, you're like, oh, this is a really good team, I'm going to pick them. And then they don't do it. It's like the opposite of Jeff Brom. Like Jeff Brom delivers kind of what you expect. Like that's what he's doing at Purdue. I think Dave Doran sort of over delivers, under delivers. Like if they're picked to do well, they don't really cover that. And when they are not picked to do well, they do well enough for him to save his own skin. And it seems like they're just stuck in this endless rut of not being good enough to like be an ACC championship team. I think they're like I feel like they're the one that hasn't won the league maybe out of all the teams.
I don't know that they have. Yeah. They've only had one 10-win season in their program's history.
Yeah, they have like wild. The weirdest history for a program that's essentially an SEC school. If you look at them and Virginia Tech are as close as a guy who's covered the SEC for many years. Like they are as close as you get in the league. I would say they're closer than Florida State and Clemson in some ways. Now those two programs sell out and all that stuff, but just in terms of the diehardness of the like South Carolina, man, you go to South Carolina, they suck, and the stadium's still usually full. Like. If Florida State's bad, their fans don't show up. Like when they've been bad, they have really bad attendance problems. When they're not real good, they have attendance problems. Clemson's a little bit better than that, but Clemson's sort of that's all there is there, right? NC State, there's tons of stuff. You live in Raleigh in the Triangle area. There's a lot of things to do on a Saturday other than go to an NC State football game, but they show up all the time. And Virginia Tech's the same way, man. Like there's nothing else there. It reminds me so much of like Starkville or like a lot of these places I've been to that are not like kind of off the beaten track in the SEC country. And it's interesting to me like how those, like Virginia Tech's actually won something. So like, and was, in the thick of national championship races and those things. And NC State just hasn't been. Like even Duke had like, a great season with Steve Spurrier and a couple good ones with Cutcliffe. Relative to what they are, NC State just has never done it. And it's so like, you just wonder like, why is that? Like, it makes no sense on paper. Like when you look at it, they're in an area with talent. You can recruit. You're not really getting killed by Carolina or Duke the way you are in basketball. They've had like 4 starting NFL quarterbacks there. Literally 2 on the team at the same time at one point. Like, and yet those guys didn't win. Like, they didn't win though. Phillip Rivers didn't win. Like you won okay. They won 9 games or something like that, but like Maryland had more success than them, like in the league. So that one's always the one that's fascinating to me. They've just been in this perpetual thing. They always match whatever the offer is Dave Doran gets, and then he stays, and then they underachieve the next season, and then the fans get all angry, and then he wins 8-9 games, and then they're settled down. They seem to just be stuck in this pattern. It's like a slightly better version of Chan Gailey. That would be like how I would describe it.
Like upper purgatory. Like
like there's no highs, and Georgia Tech fans probably would love to have that right now, but eventually they'll get frustrated with it, and that's sort of the issue you run into. And that's where Paul struggled. He couldn't get quite up into the upper purgatory in the back half after 2014, and he lost a couple games there that should have had them in that 8-9 range.
Yep.
And getting overscheduled. But NC State's a team that doesn't overschedule themselves either. So like,
Right.
I don't know, man. That's the one that bugs me the most. If I was a fan of them, I'd be pretty pissed that like they can't figure it out. I mean,
No good reason that they couldn't, you know.
No, their non-conference this year is okay. They play Tennessee's their big game. Tennessee's not as good as they've been. The Western Carolina, La Tech, and Northern Illinois. That's who they're playing. Georgia Tech's playing Notre Dame, Georgia, and then
feisty crosstown rival.
Yeah, the feisty crosstown rival and VMI. Like,
yeah,
you know, it's a little different scheduling. I mean, they play. Yeah, I mean they're playing Wake, at Cal, Stanford, who's not great, Duke. Like those, that's their big. They're the really only hard part of NC State's schedule is their last two games, and then the game at Clemson and the Tennessee game, I guess. Tennessee's ranked in the top 15 because they're in the SEC. So
yeah,
they would not.
That was something I was telling somebody the other day was that it's you know we've been doing these previews and it's already exhausting that with every team in the ACC we have to be talking about easy schedule, hard schedule, because it's no longer, well, yeah, you're a coastal team, so you play all the other teams in the coastal, or you're an Atlantic team, you play all the, you know, it's everybody has some random mix of 8 ACC teams, and NC State, I think, and Virginia Tech are kind of the two that stick out that are like, man, like this is, you really caught a lot of the teams that are on the bottom half of the conference, and you know, we're not predicting them to have a shot to go to Charlotte because they're objectively, you know, a top 3 or 4 team in the conference. It's more like, well, they just got a really good luck of the draw. And that's, you know, I don't love that personally, just from a, you know, I would like teams of merit and an ability to go there, you know, and have a chance to win the conference. But it's kind of the world we're living in, I guess, these days. And as you mentioned earlier, hopefully Georgia Tech catches the downswing of things next year and gets a little bit more of a forgiving schedule.
Well, so like this year, Tech plays on the road. They play at Louisville, at Virginia Tech, at North Carolina, right? And
is the Florida State game a road game technically?
I don't think so. I think it's a home game for Tech because they haven't played them. They've played them twice down there, and I haven't played them here since. What is the other road game? I'm forgetting one. Aren't I?
I'm blanking on it too. Hang on.
Is there another ACC road game or no?
Syracuse.
Oh, Syracuse. Okay.
Yeah.
So Syracuse is their easy game. So like on paper, like of the road games, right? So next year they play at Boston College, at Duke, at Wake, and then they have NC State on the road. So that's their hard road game. And they get Pitt, who they haven't played in several years since Pitt got bad. And they get Cuse at home and VT at home and Clemson again at home for the first time in a while. First time in Bobby Dodd and probably forever. They haven't played them in Bobby Dodd since early in Jeff's tenure, I think.
They definitely played them at home. Was it 20?
Well, so Paul's last year they played him at home, I think. I feel like that was a game that was sort of weirdly close.
It was at Bobby Dodd that Clemson had the punter throw a touchdown pass to make it like 73 to 7.
Game. It was 73 to 7 or something like that.
Was that the COVID year maybe?
Yeah, that was the one time they played in like recent memory. They played in the Benz twice, I think. I feel like, hold on. Now I gotta look this up because it's gonna bother me. And then, of course, famously, they switched the series when Dan Radakovich right before he left.
Right.
So they played at Clemson twice.
Yep. Thanks, Dan.
That was his lasting gift to the program. No. So, yeah, they played in 22 in the Benz, right? 20 was the game in Bobby Dodd. That was 73 to 7. In Paul's last year, they played in 18. I don't remember if where that game was. Maybe that was in Bobby Dodd.
I think that would have been in Atlanta. Because
the
Jeff
16
Collins
game
game
was the one that I'm
was
thinking about that was
Clemson.
weirdly close. What?
Game 1, Jeff Collins 2019 was in Clemson, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was at Clemson where they were lifting weights on the sidelines.
Right. Yeah.
The most infamous thing I've ever seen in person, probably, where people literally that do not care about Georgia Tech that are friends of mine from college or whatever were texting me during the game, what the hell are they doing? And other coaches and Paul Johnson were texting me, what the hell are they doing? Paul got a real kick out of that.
Really set a good tone there early on in the tenure for.
And then they fumbled. They
go.
Forced a punt on the first drive. I'll never forget this. And Wanye muffed the punt, and they recovered the ball and scored an easy touchdown.
Really set the tone early on.
And then that really set the tone. Yes, and I was concerned for a while they weren't going to score, and then they scored somehow twice.
Yeah, in the fourth quarter or whatever it was. Yeah.
And then the punter game was the Jeff Collins, the moment where I was like, you got to fire this dude. Like, you can't lose games like this. Like,
yeah, you got to have some pride.
Beyond even like when people were stealing signs from Al Groh, like bad. Like, this is so bad. It was his Changeli at Georgia moment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been a while. It was 14 was the last win for Tech in that series. The infamous game where the Clemson, I'm no longer allowed on our Clemson message board on Rivals because prior to that game, I warned them they were very high on themselves going into that game. And I said that I thought Deshaun Watson was gimpy after having watched him. And if they knocked him out of the game, that Georgia Tech would give them a game. And what happened? Lo and behold, they knocked him out in the beginning of the game and then scored defensive touchdowns multiple times off Cole Stout and beat them. So
yep,
28-6.
That is. I remember that very well.
That was the last dub over the Orange have won 1, 2, 3, 9 in a row now.
Yeah, It went south after that. That's for sure.
It's worse than the Georgia series right now for Georgia Tech.
How
about that?
That's a way to think about it. Yikes.
Yep.
All right. Well, to get back on topic here, real quick.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm going to say 6-6. I just, again, really tough schedule.
That's a Tech man pick, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna be kind of conservative with it, I think, but I do think they get back to a bowl game. They'll find a way, one way or another, to get back to a bowl game. I do think, but I'm with you on upside. I mean, and again, like it wouldn't take a lot of crazy improvements on defense to see things and be able to give some teams some games where they're not expecting them. So I'm gonna say 6-6, but that's again kind of trying to curb my own expectations. I think I would be a little bit disappointed if you ended up at 5-7. I don't know how the Vegas win total is 4.5 right now. It would take a pretty disastrous season, I think, to end up 4-8 at this point. So I fully expect better than that.
Man, if that happens, there'll be people jumping off, bridges in downtown Atlanta or something, dude. That would be like just a catastrophic situation with the level of talent they have. It would take like what happened in 2015 when everyone on the team basically got hurt for Georgia Tech for them to win 4 games. That would be more shocking to me than them winning 13 games. Be winning 4.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, my range is anywhere from 6 to 9. Realistically, I fall at 7, 8 wins. Depends on if they beat Florida State, then I think they have a good shot at 8. If they don't, then I think 7's sort of the ceiling of it, but they're going to have to work their butts off to get 7 at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think the Florida State game is very, very interesting for how it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the schedule. So we'll see how that goes. Mike McDaniel had to drop here a little while ago. You might have noticed. I had to deal with some parenting stuff, but he let me know his prediction here was 5-7. Need to see it on defense, but expects the offense to be good. So again, being kind of conservative here, I think, but he and I are in agreement about, Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech being in similar places. He's picking Virginia Tech to win 9. So I think it's entirely function of the two schedules.
He thinks they're going to roll through that schedule of road games, the non-conference road games at Vanderbilt and Old Dominion. That's going to give them a really hard, and that tough Rutgers game that they have non-conference.
I mean, Kelly, can you imagine Virginia Tech losing a road game to Old Dominion? Like, would they ever
Frank
do that?
Beamer would probably stroke out and die, because he brought so much talent from that area to Virginia Tech, that would be such an embarrassment for him. I'll never forget. I was in the press box, and he sat next, and his booth was like right next to where I was sitting
Beamer.
for the Matthew Jordan game, and when Georgia Tech beat them, and then he rode an elevator down with me to like go down to after the game. He was leaving, and I was going to media. And just seeing like how dejected he was and how much that entertained me, even though he's a nice old man, that, that he was so pissed off that they had lost that game. Yeah, those are good memories. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, if the Monarchs knocked off Virginia Tech, that would be quite the lightning bolt. I don't think Vanderbilt's a real threat. Marshall, I don't know how good or bad Marshall is. They definitely put the scare in some people last year. I think Rutgers is going to be a handful for them in that game at Miami. I think they definitely are going to be, that's their make or break game. If they beat Miami, then yeah, I think they could get to maybe 9 wins. But if they lose like any of those first 5 games, I think that they're going to have a little bit more trouble getting there. Because you still have that Clemson game, which I think will be bad for them. And then they'll get to beat Tony Elliott in his final game at Virginia. He'll coach his last game in Lane Stadium. That'll be fun for Tony Elliott.
I hear a built-in prediction there as well. That's
what did I pick them? Hold on, I'll tell you. I feel like I had them at 2 wins. I was not super optimistic of the futures for the that dude. They suck, man. Like they're not good. I just that's a team you would like if you are a Georgia Tech fan. You would like to have on the schedule right now. Let's see, what did I have? 3-9. Sorry.
yeah.
Virginia's 3 wins I had were Richmond at Coastal, which I think is a toss up, and Boston College, because I think Boston College is going to be pretty awful too. 4-8 for Boston College. If you want, I can tell you. Clemson was my number 1. Florida State and Louisville and Miami and NC State and SMU all in a 9-win multi-tie, which would be very fun to see the scenario play out for that. Georgia Tech, UNC, and Virginia Tech at 8-4 each. Cal, Cuse, and Wake at 6 wins each. That's a little bit of a homer pick because I got a soft spot for Dave Clawson. Pitt gets close to a bowl game at 5-7. BC 4-8, Duke 4-8, Stanford 4-8, Virginia 3-9. I think Stanford might be a little bit better than people think. I'm probably giving Pitt too much credit. This might be it for Narduzzi there.
Yeah.
But they have also one of the more favorable schedules, playing Kent State at Cincinnati, who's terrible and as a coach is about to get fired. Youngstown State and Cal and UVA. I think those are all winnable games for them. So
our guy Jim Hammett from the Pitt rival site always tells us, he's great. He's been with us for a long time. He has the most ridiculous stat I've ever heard that we go over every year, and it's still true. Pitt has never gone 4-0 out of conference. Every year. There was a year that they beat, was it Penn State? I think they knocked off like a ranked Penn State team, and then they got like shellacked by like Central Michigan or something.
I remember that. Yes.
Like just ridiculous things that sound fake that are actually true. That's a fact. Pitt has never gone 4-0 out of conference. That's nuts.
Can you imagine? Like,
oh man.
I mean, Tech has to beat Georgia to get there, so that's like a huge hurdle. But like, they've done it a couple times.
I was gonna say, I was looking at it the other day, and we'll get out of here on this. Is the 2016 team goes 9-4? They actually finished 5th in the Coastal Division because they were 4-4 in conference play. But they won all 4 of their out of conference games, and then they won a bowl game to get to 9. So that was kind of a weird, unusual season, I would say, by Georgia Tech standards in a lot of ways.
They beat Kentucky, the Wildcats, in a game where Kentucky fans had the confidence of Kentucky's men's basketball at their prime about that game going into it, and thought it was going to be this beating. It was a beating. It was just the other way around.
Yeah, the receiving end, not the giving end.
Yeah, they were put back into their place, and like Georgia Tech was still in the SEC.
Yep, absolutely. Kelly, it's been a lot of fun. Really appreciate your time as always. You're incredibly generous with it. You want to tell the people real quick where they can go find your stuff?
Sure. Jackets Online, which is on the Rivals.com network. We have tons of team coverage, recruiting, basketball, football. We'll do more baseball this year too. Have a new recruiting team writer, Alex Farrar, who's very talented, that brought into the fold. And I think people really enjoy it. We have our own YouTube show on, just type in JOL TV and you'll find that. We do that at least weekly. And then you can find me on social media at Kelly_Quinlan on X. The Instagram, that's Jackets Online. I'm not super active on and probably need to step that up. But I'm an old man and I refuse to get TikTok, and I have not really learned how Instagram works. So,
well, I'm right there with you. I've got, I'm in the same place, so completely understand.
Somebody asked me the other day when I was going to start posting on Threads, and I was like, man, I just can't. There's too much stuff you have to post your things on now. Like, it doesn't work for me, man. Like, just go to the website. But he's like, I want to follow you, but Twitter's so toxic. I was like, yeah, I know, brother, but like, it's more people on this still, It's not quite MySpace yet.
Yeah. We're getting there.
We are. We'll be there soon. I mean, it is eerily similar in a lot of ways, actually.
Yeah.
To what MySpace became, the back end of that. But
yep.
That's where you can find me. And we do a lot of fun stuff. I think we're getting ready to do a video on Georgia Tech and the NCAA football game and like some thoughts on. But I just started finally. I haven't had time to play because of camp. I just finally started playing a dynasty with them to get used to playing with them and then get used to the game again. And it's been very funny to see the stuff they got wrong with the roster and that you can't fix it, which is equally annoying to me.
Yep. Yeah. I've gotten a chance to play a couple of games myself. It's fun playbook, Haynes King, fun to play with, like that kind of thing. But it's, that
learning curve is way different than the
it
10 years ago or whatever it was.
Definitely is. It definitely is. Kelly, really appreciate your time. As I tell people all the time, every time you come on here, if you're a Georgia Tech fan and you love college football and you love Georgia Tech enough to where you're listening to this podcast, especially an hour and 25 minutes in or whatever it is, Jackets Online more than worth your $100 a year. So highly recommend, go get a subscription there, go listen to, check in on Kelly's stuff. We didn't even talk really about recruiting on this show, but it's recruiting trending very well, in a very positive direction. I think they're swimming in some waters that they're really not used to in recent years. So a lot of excitement there. Go follow Kelly and give him your support there at JacketsOnline.com. Kelly, you're the man. Thank you so much. We look forward to having you on sometime again soon. All right.
Sounds good, guys.
All right. Let's get out of here. We got a couple more previews to record and get out here, I think, depending on when this is released. But keep it tuned here. In the meantime, we're going to have some additional full season previews, and then we got week 0 previews and week 1 and everything coming after that. So keep it tuned here. We'll get you ready and get you going for the season. We're on Twitter at BC Podcast ACC, at FTRS Joey, at Mike McDaniel SI, and once again, he's at Kelly_Quinlan on Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. I'm just a rebel.
Yeah, I call it Twitter too. I say I tweeted and say I posted something.
Yep. We're on Instagram. We're on all those places. Go find us. Hit the subscribe button. youtube.com/@the ACC Football Podcast. Appreciate your support there. All right, we're going to get out of here. We're going to come back, finish these previews, get the season actually rolling. We're going to talk about some actual football here very, very soon, so keep it tuned here. Until next time, for Mr. Kelly Quinlan, for Mr. Mike McDaniel, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Until next time, go Jackets and go ACC.